single control system might have hundreds of CVEs, never been patched, right? And the client on the manufacturing side is not trying to move the needle, don't know how to move the needle. And the IT organization is just oblivious to it. They may know it exists, but it's not their problem.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Dino Busalaki.
And I'm Craig Duckworth. And today we're going to talk about some challenges in the OT space, commonly referred to as vendor lock or software lock from manufacturers, OEMs that are putting machine centers, equipment into environments that need to secure that software version before releasing it during the production cycle. What's your thoughts on that, Dino?
Well, when I think of the OEMs and the machine centers on the plant floor, the term I like using is OEM Blockade. And what that means is don't touch my stuff, right? And unfortunately, that's just not the way the game is played anymore. And because the OEMs are creating remote access into these environments, there's a lot of information that's being pulled out of there that's valuable not only to the manufacturer who may own or lease those machines, but also the OEMs themselves because they're wanting to build better pieces of equipment. They wanted to extend the maintenance cycles, do a better job of doing predictive maintenance and analytics around that equipment. And so the question is you have connectivity, but then there's also vulnerabilities that are created because of that connectivity.
And I would say most environments, most organizations that are buying equipment, whether that's a CNC machine to cut, bend, press metal, or that is a packaging line, a filler line, a processing line, whatever that is, most of them may not recognize that the OEM that's making that for them froze that software or that version of Windows machine that's running the HMI that's going to process it 4, 5, 6 months, a year, 18 months ago when they, let's call it factory acceptance tested that software, that versioning, so that it all works before they install it. And think of all of the vulnerabilities that have not been patched on this brand new piece of equipment that you just put in.
Well, they don't care about that. I mean, at the end of the day, OEM doesn't care. They don't, right? Because they don't want to erode their margins, right? They want to be able to put that machine out there because they're competing, right? They might be competing to sell that piece of equipment. So they're doing anything they can to reduce their cost and anything they got to do to continually try to improve, for instance, cybersecurity posture, to your point around vulnerabilities, means that they have to charge for that work, right? Now, it doesn't mean that there's not warranty and maintenance in place. Could be, but is it enough to cover their costs to determine what patching can I do in order to improve the cybersecurity posture of that equipment? And what is the real truth? Meaning, who's providing the vulnerability information in order to determine what level do I need to be at, right?
Well, someone, maybe the CISO, maybe someone should care that I'm putting a brand new piece of equipment on that may have 50, 30, 100 vulnerabilities, and I haven't even turned it on or started it up yet. That should matter to someone. I understand, not the OEM.
But they're powerless. I mean, again, Windows 7 machines, right? How often do we find Windows 7 and XP machines on the plant floor environment?
Only every time that we go out.
Every time. And what would a CISO normally say if that machine was on their network that they're responsible for?
First, they would never admit that it was on their network because they would instantly say, there's no way I would allow that on my network ever.
They would take it off. And they actually tell the plant to do that until the plant says, well, then the plant's going to shut down. And then the conversation stops.
Correct.
It's just the way the game is played. Now, what the CISO should be doing, he or she should be looking at alternatives to hardening the posture around that Windows 7 machine, virtual patching. Right? Microsegmentation of the network. There are tools and technologies in place to be able to have to deal with a Windows 7 machine that's on your network. Not only just a Windows 7, right? Because that's very common and most people understand that, especially from the
Yeah.
IT world. But what about a PLC that's been out there for 10 or 15 years? Remember, the life cycle for this equipment is measured in decades,
Right.
not in 3 to 5 or 7 years, but in decades, right? And
Right.
so that's why when we get out there, we find a single control system might have hundreds of CVEs, never been patched, right? And the client on the manufacturing side is not trying to move the needle, don't know how to move the needle. And the IT organization is just oblivious to it. They may know it exists, but it's not their problem, you know,
Well,
at the end of the day.
there are a long list of compensating controls, and you mentioned a few of them. There's virtual patching, there is microsegmentation,
We got
there is
we got SD-WAN technology that
Yeah.
we can overlay into that control system environment right now. And OT knows what SD-WAN means, and they know
Mhm.
what that technology can contribute, but they don't know how to apply it to the plant floor because they don't know the applications, they don't know the
Right.
process, and they don't understand what those control systems are doing and what's necessary for them to communicate amongst themselves to drive the widgets that are being
Yeah.
pumped out of that plant.
But again, that's where I think organizations should say, okay, we have this talent, we have this SD-WAN expert that's on our IT side. The OT team should say, I need one of those, or I need that person to come over here and show me how to do it, or implement for me and do it under my direction for the plant, not from an IT perspective, and almost take the same framework and principles and apply them differently, if that makes
Well,
sense.
Well, you heard me say OEM blockade. I know we
Yes.
talk about IT/OT convergence. There's a blockade between IT and OT in a lot of
It's a
cases.
collision.
Well, a collision, but it's also a blockade, meaning that neither side is working together to solve this problem. They may talk about it at a certain level, per
Right.
se, to saying, hey, I got a couple of people whose job it is to try to solve these problems. But when you really get down to it, when you're working with OEMs and system integrators that are designing and building these machines,
Hmm.
there is no connectivity to the IT teams, right? We're in the position, what we're pushing now, what I think is a more relevant approach is that the services side, just like IT has services, you know, when they have, you mentioned SD-WAN. Well, you're not necessarily going to find an SD-WAN expert in an organization, even from an IT perspective. They might rely on a third party to provide that from, just
Okay.
like cloud or
Right.
database or, you know, infrastructure support and design. Sometimes they rely on services for that. The same approach, you know, in order to deal with this is you have to start providing services in the OT space that bring that SD-WAN thought process, this cybersecurity thought process, virtual patching, right? People who understand a PLC that's driving kinetic physical systems like drives and how that works, you know, to make sure that that integrity stays within that arena, that machine center to operate safely and perform optimally, right? And you're never going to get IT to that point. You're just not, right? But you are going to get the machine builder and their ecosystem of OT suppliers to be able to do that, right? And have the same tools, maybe a little different because they're geared for OT versus IT tool sets versus OT tool sets, to be able to apply those solutions around that process area.
Yeah. And you're right. We don't often see both teams sitting at the table together. If we look at an organization that's procuring a process cell or a machine center, we almost never see IT saying, I need you to put this standard hardware in that. The OEM is left to do as they choose, or oftentimes we see them saying, you know what, I can do that, but it's going to be 8 months down the road and your price is going to double.
It's a discipline, right? I mean, the IT discipline and the OT discipline are not the same. We always talk about priorities, right?
Mhm.
Confidentiality, integrity, and
Availability.
right? And you flip it around for the OT guys, but it's a discipline, right? And
Right.
so how do you apply those disciplines in the right measure around those control systems, right? And the disciplines are different, right? You can't necessarily take somebody who's really good at managing a Microsoft infrastructure and say, I'm going to apply those same rules around the infrastructure that's using Windows to run my plant floor systems. You know, you might from a platform perspective, but what have we seen, right? We've seen IT and OT use combined infrastructure in a plant, right? Because
Right.
that's, from an economy perspective, that makes
Yeah.
sense, right?
Well,
Being
yes, for
powered
sure.
pipe, you know, processor, memory, networking, and storage. So it makes sense to try to share those resources. But what have we seen? we've seen IT who gets hit with some type of breach, and what happens to the plant floor because they're running on the same platform, right?
It takes it
And
off.
so now they're taking it apart.
Yeah.
Right? Now they're back to separating those OT applications, where the HMIs are that are VMs and the historians and the engineering workstations and the OT application servers, recipe servers, project servers are being separated again.
Yeah.
So you combine them, and now you're pulling them apart, because if IT gets dinged, then it just impacts my plant floor. We've seen that with CrowdStrike.
Right.
From a security perspective, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's thinking, nobody really thought about the fact that I was running CrowdStrike on my HMI. There was a back-end cloud issue, a human error that made its way all the way down and shut down my plant.
But we don't hear that, though. We don't hear, you listen to the mainstream media, and this was an IT issue. This was only corporate America. You don't hear the stories that we see and we are privy to on the manufacturing side and on the industrial side of an HMI running that. And it took down the plant for 2 days. So they figured it up, and they had to walk around with thumb drives, and they had to reboot all these machines. Mainstream media doesn't hear that.
Well, and I think from a manufacturing standpoint, I think they're perfectly fine with that. Why does anybody want to admit that I shut down my plant for a week or 2 weeks or even several days and lost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because of that, right? Why do I want my investors to know that? So I think I'm speculating some, but again, why would they want to tip their hand to say, yeah, our plant was shut down because of this particular event?
But I think they could take that and they could build upon that and help build budget, help build resources, help build a roadmap for a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan to fix that problem going forward, to put capital toward a resolve versus just sweeping under the carpet and hoping there's not another CrowdStrike type event in a couple of years.
I think that's what they're banking on. If it doesn't happen for another 5 or 7 years, do I care? Right? If I try to solve something I'm not really good at, I really don't got my arms and hands around to try to solve, right?
Right.
And when you think about the diversification of the number of assets in a plant floor compared to an IT space, right, where they're very standardized on the platforms they're using, the networks that they're using, the compute platforms, the databases, their applications. And you might be able to surmise and go, well, if I really look at it, there might be a dozen or so standard technologies we use. You get on the plant floor and you can find hundreds in a plant, thousands in a series of 100 plants if you have them, of various stuff that they've bought. There's mergers and acquisitions that go on. They're not even out there doing their due diligence to determine, do I have end of life and end of support assets out there? Which ones are they? Is there malware out there in these plants I'm getting ready to buy? Where's the due diligence behind that? I mean, that just demonstrates the gap. They'll do that on the IT side.
Yeah,
they try to gather as much information on what is it that I'm buying. They have a different ERP system than I do. I know that. Are we going to merge them over and convert them to ours? Are we going to let them keep their own? But when you get on the plant floor, they're not doing that due diligence at all.
No, they're not. And along with that same vein is, as the world is becoming more, let's call it geopolitical, more nation state adversaries, there's reasons to advance certain economies and let's call it de-advance, probably not a word, but close enough, other economies by trying to stymie production. So there's that aspect as well. It plays in all across the arena.
OT's just got to get better at it, right? They just got to take the bull by the horns and determine what do they need to do to be successful. That means the technologies you use, the cybersecurity technologies that are involved. I mean, how many companies have we worked with where IT has bought an OT cybersecurity tool and they're not even sharing the data with the OT people?
I would say probably close to half.
Yeah. And even then, the data that they're supplying them, is it valid? How many false positives are in there? Is the patch level that you're telling me that my machine at, is that really correct? What's the verification? What trust but verify, right? And so there's no buy-in from the OT side. And then you get, like I said, you get into the OEM blockade, and it's very easy for the manufacturer to go, I can't touch that machine because if I do, it's going to void my warranty. It's like, do you even know what it means to get in there? You're already providing remote access in. It's already being touched. Somebody's already coming in and out of that environment. already. So I don't know what you mean by not being touched. I can probably find 7 to 8 ways it's being touched right now. And
Right.
that seems to be okay with you. What's one more? And it's not even so much a touch as it is a listen.
I think back to the conversations we've had with client where we're sitting there and they're like, I got this report from our SOC and it says my vulnerabilities are 3,000. I'm just going to pick a number. And I looked through and I know that none of this is valid because we had a project last week where we upgraded all these machines that are on this list that said none of them are upgraded. So now I have zero confidence in anything that's coming, and they will wad the paper up and throw it in the trash can and say, that's the value of the report. And we have this tool that I don't get access to. The reporting they give me is garbage. I don't even know what we're paying for. I've sat in those conversations. I think back, it's not really comical, but it's comical at the time because I can see that playing over and over again in multiple different organizations that we touch.
They're tripping over dollars to pick up nickels, right? I mean, they are. I mean, and now, we're in a position where, when you start working with OEMs and SIs that are dealing with what we still call the ghost in the machine, right? I lost my filler. I don't know why I quit working, or these drives have been kind of wobbling. And by the time, we stop and try to figure out what's going on, it goes away. And it's because nobody's watching the digital signature surrounding those connected physical systems to determine is that's what causing this machine not to run correctly or to shut it down, right? If they can't put their finger on a mechanical issue, then they're guessing, right? And then they're more inclined to get back up and running as quickly as they can instead of trying to figure out what's causing the problem. They'll wait for it to come around again, and it will.
Yeah, it will.
And all of a sudden, they're going to lose a few hours or a day of downtime. And the OEMs and system integrators who are becoming more increasingly responsible for maintaining and supporting that equipment, they're going to get smarter, and they're going to start bringing tools to the table. They're going to find out what that ghost in the machine is. It's chasing those drive problems or PLC issues that they might be having. And then you've got behavior issues you're going to have to start knocking down. And chances are pretty good it's just somebody coming into the environment, scanning it, trying to do diligence, primarily IT, or you put CrowdStrike out there in the environment somewhere close to that OT environment, and it's bleeding out and over into your control system environment, causing grief. And now we have the ability to start finger pointing and saying, I can tell you exactly what happened. I can tell you exactly why your filler quit working at 10:10 last night. And here's what happened. Joey got on his laptop. He logged into the network. He started scanning the machine. The PLC was trying to do X, Y, and Z. It couldn't do it in a timely manner, and it COM faulted, and it went into safe mode, and it shut down.
So really what they're doing is they're walking in, they're pulling back the curtain and say, oh my God, you're not a wizard. You're just a short man. It's simple.
Yeah, right. And the same thing with the OEM. Right. The OEM could be causing you problems and they're finger pointing, right? I mean, I call it getting all the liars in the same room, to eliminate the finger pointing. You got an OEM, you got an SI plant people, you might have IT involved, and IT's like, we're not doing anything. And, the automation technology vendor, you bought the drives, are saying, yeah, everything's fine as far as I can tell. You got the OEM saying the programming's correct, everything's set the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
But what nobody's catching is whatever's wandering into that environment, it's causing disruption. And it's easy to find today. I mean, we have the tools to do it. There's even clients who have these tools and are still not looking at it at that level.
And part of it is the marketing around the tools and the technologies. The software vendors that are manufacturing, designing the software, Clarity, Nozomi, Armis, Dragos, they're the whole, myriad of them. They're advertising this and they're selling this as a cybersecurity tool, which it is, and it does have a cybersecurity component, but there is a lot larger portion of that, in my opinion, which is called process integrity, which is more about how to manage the business, how to ensure that your OEE and your uptime and your margin is there to kind of help prevent and understand the way that the operational teams are performing versus just a cyber aspect, because we hear all the time, I don't know the numbers, 80, 90% of all attacks come from the IT side. IT is very rich in cyber related tools and technologies. Let's use this one for what it is. Let's take advantage of the cyber portion and leverage it for the process integrity and start helping the OT teams be better equipped.
I think the OT teams need to get better equipped themselves. They're the only ones that are going to change. IT is not going to change this dynamic. They're just not, right? I can't stress that enough, that the only people who are going to solve these particular issues when it comes to machine safety, production and process control, are the people who design and build, manage and maintain those machine centers. And that is not IT. It is
True.
not. And never will it be, right? I don't care what anybody says. I'll argue with the smartest guy out there in the internet world who wants to have this chat. And let's go through that and see how much time you've actually spent on the plant floor trying to troubleshoot problems and thinking that IT is solving these problems for you when the drives on that machine center are not working correctly. Or somebody changing the program on that PLC and exactly what did they change and why was it changed? They're not going to know and they're not going to care. To me, this whole IT OT thing sounds good, but in practice and in real practice,
yeah.
no.
Until there is a lot more partnership, collaboration, joint ownership, you're right. It's on paper, it looks fantastic. Reality, it still lacks a little bit.
IT wants plausible deniability.
They get it because they don't come down and do anything.
They want plausible deniability.
Not my problem.
Right? Not my problem, right?
Yeah.
And so then it falls on the shoulders of those people out there whose bonuses and paychecks, because that's the revenue generating side of the business, right? It's not IT generating revenue for you. It's
Right.
generating revenue for you.
Yeah.
They're the ones who care. They have to get better. They got to start finding services and technologies and working with partners that understand their business and what they got out there on that plant floor to be successful. So if you're talking to IT VARs, you're talking to some consulting agency out there with one of those 3 or 4 letter acronyms, you're probably wasting your time, right?
Well, again, they serve a purpose. They provide value in the fact that they can roadmap, they can give guidance, support to a CISO, to an organization. What they lack skill sets in most often is the ability to deliver, the boots on the ground, the practitioner as we know it. That's where they really struggle. You know, they're not that comfortable down where we are.
They need to be able to tell whether you're doing good enough or not. It's one thing to sit there and say, yeah, you need to do this. You need a cybersecurity strategy for your manufacturing environment. Yeah, you do. Okay, what's good?
Well, and every organization would say, I agree with that. Now, where are we? You just told me what I already knew. That's no different than somebody that says, don't come in here with your tool and tell me what I already know. I already know I got a network that's a mess. I already know it's flat. I already know it's full of vulnerabilities. If that's all you're going to tell me, don't waste my time or your effort.
That's right. You know, so as we kind of wrap this up, my point to this in conversation around diversification in regards to it needs to be focused on your specific manufacturing environment and the control systems that you use to make the goods that you make every single day. And that ecosystem of partners who help design and build and support and maintain that equipment, provide the programming for the PLCs and the SCADA systems and the DCSs. That's your audience that you need to be working with. And there are partners out there, there are services out there that come in from this world who focus on that stuff that are a part of that ecosystem. So if you're buying, again, from an IT VAR, you're not going to get to where you need to be.
Right.
End of story. You're just not.
It's true.
You have to have something on the other side of that equation. Right. And if you don't have something on the other side of the equation that can sit there and speak to that particular machine center or that particular plant or that particular packaging line, then you guys are not on the same page. Right. Yeah. It's just, and we work with engineering firms who build plants, who build machines. Sure. We don't sit in the room with IT. It's not that we don't want to, but IT is not in the room dictating much of anything outside of the network from the IDF up.
Well, correct. And it's like they speak different languages, Dino. You know, we walk into, you know, a coffee shop and I'm speaking German and you're speaking Italian and 2 guys over there speaking Mandarin. nobody knows what anybody's saying. We may all be saying the same thing and nobody understands it.
Yeah.
These tools are
ordering the
good.
same coffee in 4 different languages.
Right, exactly.
The same coffee in 4 different languages, right?
Yeah, for
So
sure.
You have to engage the ecosystem of OT suppliers to solve this problem. And if you're not doing that, if you're an IT guy in a leadership position and your role and goal is trying to figure out OT cybersecurity, your new best friends have to be the people who build and support those machines on the plant floor.
Yeah, and you look at an organization like ours, Dino, that is agnostic to the manufacturing plant floor because we're accustomed to working with all of the automation vendors, Rockwell, Siemens, Schneider, Honeywell, Beckhoff. The tools don't care. The tools will give you the technology that's there. They will give you the vulnerabilities for each of the manufacturers. They understand the protocols and the language of each of them. And don't think that this is not solvable because it absolutely is. You just have to reach out and ask for help. Organizations are willing to give the guidance, the support, the help. You got to choose the right partner. That partner ecosystem, like you said, is critical and key to success.
Yeah.
IT has had a 30-year head start. We are just now scratching the surface, trying to get where we need to be, and it's not going to happen overnight. Rome was built in 2 days, not 1. People need to realize that.
Yeah. Well, until next time.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys.
It's safe.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.